Welcome to the Spotlight, and thanks for joining us. I'm David Rose. Just about every detective I know has a case that's kept them up at night, especially when it's a homicide they just can't crack. But thanks to amazing breakthroughs in science and growing databases of DNA, those cold cases are starting to get cleared more often, sending shivers down the spines of predators everywhere who thought they got away with it. It's also giving hope to the families of victims that they might eventually get justice. Take the disturbing murder in 1995 of Patricia Barnes, for example. Her nude body was found in Kitsap County. She had been shot twice in the head. It was a case that stymied investigators for more than 20 years, until Kitsap County Sheriff's Detective Mike Grant solved it, thanks to DNA.
On August 25th of 1995, some passerbys had found the remains of a deceased female in the 15,000 block of Peacock Hill Road in South Kitsap. Deputies and detectives ultimately responded and found Patricia Barnes. She was identified later through her latent fingerprints, and she was discovered to have been shot twice in the head. One thing that really stood out is the detectives found it remarkable that there was kind of mixed foliage that was dumped with her body. So it wasn't the Douglas fir and the stuff that's native there, but amongst the foliage included what was several cigarette butts. They followed up with the Seattle Police Department and tried to kind of backtrack things to try to recreate her situation and who she's with and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. And they followed up with a number of people who were acquaintances of hers and people that knew her, and ultimately the person that had last seen her alive before she had left with an unknown male subject. The witness gave a description to a detective who did a sketch, and it has remarkable similarities to the person who was later identified as her killer. The case ended up going cold. There was just kind of a limited social circle. They processed the scene here in Kitsap very thoroughly. It was well done by 1995 standards, and it was well done by 2022 standards, to be very honest with you. And I spoke with a number of the detectives who worked the case originally, and they were honest with me. They said, look, DNA just wasn't that big of a thing. It's not on our mind when we're processing these crime scenes. But the evidence that they collected proved very valuable when it came to DNA and forensic evidence. We started our own in-house review of all of our cold cases in April of 2018. So my partner, Detective Meyer, and I went through all the evidence. We examined it, we re-entered it into our database, went through all of the previous submissions to the State Patrol Crime Lab, and we thought, okay, what can we resend? What could be retested? Or what hasn't been tested that we can get some results from? And then we just kind of triaged what would be most likely to bear fruit. And so initially we submitted a handful of items to the State Patrol Crime Lab. They responded that they had developed an unknown male profile from the evidence that we had submitted. So that was promising, because that's the first break. That's the first, okay, we have traction. And so based on that, we searched against CODIS, which is just the repository of DNA for people that have been convicted of felonies and domestic violence in some cases. And there was no match. And so we're kind of at another dead end. If it wasn't for the funding and the coordination from the Attorney General's office, this would not be here today. It wouldn't have been solved. They connected us with a couple of private labs, and so we reached out to Othram Labs, who does both DNA testing and genetic genealogy follow-up. Within just a few weeks, they had identified their first or second cousin. I got a call on December 22nd, and they said, well, we have a name. And I thought, this is great, this is fantastic. And they said it's Douglas Crone, unless he has a brother. And as luck would have it, Douglas Crone has a brother. So we had to do more follow-up, that's fine. And so I tracked him down to Nogales, Arizona, and discovered that he had died in 2016, and it was an accident at his house. He and a neighbor were trying to rig up some TV antenna, and of course he put it into the power lines, and he died almost instantly, but his neighbor survived. He was subjected to an autopsy by the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office in Tucson, and they retained biological material, blood evidence, or what have you, just as a matter of course of their business. And so we reached out to Pima County. They overnighted me some of the blood from that autopsy. The next day we sent it to the State Patrol Crime Lab, and about 2 weeks later they had confirmed that Douglas Crone's DNA matched DNA collected from the evidence that strongly suggests that he's responsible for her death. And the linchpin for the evidence was a cigarette butt that was found at the body dump location. The evidence on the body could mean one of two, three different things, but when you have a cigarette butt with the DNA and the DNA on her body and on items around her body, it was conclusive to me that we had the right guy. Realistically, this case was solved in 1995, and it was just a matter of waiting for forensic science and the advent of genetic genealogy to evolve, and it was just a case waiting to be solved. How they came to meet, nobody knows. Douglas isn't mentioned in any of the reports as an acquaintance or a witness or a person of interest. I went through all of the tip logs, and no one mentioned his name, so it was just a complete random encounter, I would suspect.